Hey, I'm Mr. Williamson, and this video is about the history of the metric system. Let's get started. What is the metric system? It's a standardized method of measuring the world around us. It would be considered length, volume, and mass. We call mass weight, actually. There's a difference. Mass is the amount of substance there is, and weight is the attraction of gravity, because weight changes from planet to planet. Here's the thing you need to know about history. You will never be tested or quizzes on the dates or history that we learn, okay? But I think it's really important that you learn how we got to where we are, all right? And if you understand how we got there, sometimes it makes it clear on what you're trying to learn, all right? In other words, don't worry about taking notes on this. That's what I'm trying to say. Don't worry about taking notes. Just pay attention, because actually I think you're going to learn something here. So how did we get to where we are today? Well, before 1790, and if you think about 1790s, this was a little bit after our revolution, okay? So we measured things in like yards. 440 yards was a quarter mile. 100 links was a chain. 10 chains was a furlong. That's spelled wrong on the slide. Oops. 8 furlongs is a mile. 1 hand is 4 inches. That would be 4 inches. 1 chain is 22 yards. A rod is 5.5 yards. These are all measurements that we use. And the problem is, like things like a hand or a foot, they were based on the ruler of the country. Well, people aren't the same size, and that can be an issue. All right? And that's the problem. Everything is mixed up. Like if I say how many inches are in a foot, you say 12. How many feet in a yard? 3. How many inches in a yard? 36. How many yards in a mile? I think it's 1,570, something like that. I don't remember, and that's the problem. The metric system is based all on the decimal system. So here's the problem. Let's think of it this way. I'm going to plan a ride on my motorcycle coming from here, all right, and I'm planning my route, and I'm going to come out and visit on the side, near the river. So it'd be like the riverside, all right? And I'm coming out, and I say, okay, I'm riding my motorcycle. There I am, taking off. I'm riding my motorcycle, and I get out to the side, and I need some oil. And I come to you, and I say, hey, I need some oil for my bike. And you say, no problem. We sell a gallon of oil for $5. And I go, awesome. I give you $5, and you hand me this, okay? A gallon of oil. And I'm like, well, what the hell's that, dude? That's not a gallon of oil. And you're like, well, what do you mean talking about? And I said, well, hold on, I got a gallon. Let me show you a gallon. This is a gallon of oil. You're handing me this. These are two different things. For $5, I expect this. And you're like, yeah, well, in the side, we're paying $5 for this. And so, like, that's a problem, okay? We need to be able to communicate. When commerce, business does business, they expect to pay a certain amount of money for a certain amount of things. And that has to be standardized. It can't change country to country. Give you another example. All right? Let's say that I come back and visit myself from the future, and I've got some really big news. They say, dude, and I go, what? And I say, man, you need to know something about the future. And like 30 years from now. And I say, well, first of all, it's nice to know I'm still alive when I'm 90. But, okay, so like, future, what is it, future guy? And I go, well, you know, it's going to rain. Okay? Hard. And I go, yeah, well, we've seen rain. We've seen a lot of rain. It's not a big deal, you know. It never rains in California, but man, it pours. Google that song. Anyways, so it rained. And future me says, no, I don't think you understand. It's going to rain for like 40 days and 40 nights. Maybe 45, maybe 50. But rain. A lot of rain, okay? And let me show you. This is a picture of the top of Mount Everest. That's how much rain there's going to be. There's going to be a lot of rain. And so present day me says to future me, well, what do you suggest I do? And future me says, I suggest that you build a boat. Okay? And on that boat, you should put like 2 of every animal, 1 male, 1 female. Okay, and I go, well, that sounds like a good plan. So, you know what? I'm leaving off the mosquitoes. I don't like mosquitoes. Okay, and future me says, nope, got to take the mosquitoes. And I'm like, why? All they do is bite you and take your blood. They don't do anything. And besides, have you ever tried to figure out the sex of a mosquito? What, it's like, oh, what are you, male or female? Future me says, well, ask it. If she answers, it's a girl. If he answers, it's a boy. But you got to have one of each of the mosquitoes. I'm like, fine. How do I build this boat? Like, how big? And you say, well, it's going to be 100 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits. Awesome. What's a cubit? A cubit is the length of your arm between your elbow and your wrist. And I'm kind of like, well, okay. Modern day, it's like, well, your elbow and your wrist. So the problem here is it from here or is it from here? Because that's two different sizes. And number two, whose arm? My arm? I got pretty big arms. Or is it my little brother's arm? He's shorter than I am. He's got shorter arms. So what's a cubit? How big is a cubit? See the problem? That's the issue. Can't base it on body parts. You got to be consistent because science, business, building things. All right. So the history, 1790s. Again, think about it, this is right after our Revolutionary War, the French Revolution. France switched to the metric system. Okay, and pretty soon, because a lot of people traded with France, everybody followed except England, because England kind of was like, hey, we don't do that kind of thing. All right. The other reason that Britain didn't do it is because they had the entire British Empire that they were dealing with. All right. When there used to be a saying that the sun never sets on the British Empire, that's because the British Empire is everything you see in red here. It goes all the way from Canada, parts of South America, Britain. That's the whole thing. That's it. That was who ruled this whole thing. A lot of Africa, all of India, all of Australia, all of those were British colonies. Okay, and actually, if you were colonized by the British, basically they took away everything you believed in and said you have to believe in what we believe in. The Church of England, our rules, our laws, and the way we do things, including their measurement system, miles, pounds, things like that. All right. And as a result, nobody really liked the British, so they didn't adopt the imperial system. They adopted the metric system for the most part. In 1840, all of the French were required by law to use the metric system. And at that point, some of Europe kind of started drifting away from it, but they came back because they realized that it's a simpler system and it was something that everyone could use. All right. 1850, there was a real strong push among scientists, engineers, and businessmen for that purpose I showed you to adopt an international system. The United States might have adopted it at that time. Again, if you think about 1850, that was right before our Civil War. But actually, when first Congress met in the 1776, around then, because I don't know U.S. history perfectly, there was we would have adopted it, but they hadn't met, and they wouldn't meet, and they couldn't adopt it as a country unless they met. And there was a whole issue with somebody from France coming to visit Thomas Jefferson, and the problem was that the ship that he was taking got taken off course by a storm, so he didn't get there on time, and we didn't adopt the metric system. In 1866, again, this is right after the Civil War, right around the Civil War, I think, we did legalize the metric system, but we didn't make it mandatory. 1875, the leading industrial countries, including the U.S., signed the Treaty of the Meter, which established this International Bureau of Weights and Measurements. All right, so we're part of this treaty which says that this is what we will use in measuring. This is how we will measure things, but we don't require it in the United States. So the in 1854 international system adopted and defined the metric units that we use today: the meter for length, the kilogram for mass, the second for time. An ampere is a measure of electricity. A Kelvin is a measure of temperature. Candela is a measurement of light, and a mole is the measurement of chemistry, and you're going to learn a lot about that next year. Okay. In 1857, both the U.S. Army and the U.S. Marine Corps adopts the metric system for all their weapon systems, which allowed them to be able to interchange with the rest of the world. NATO is what we're talking about. so that their weapons, they weren't using a 45 caliber, and the other people were using a 9mm. They were all their weapons were interchangeable, so that they could work together. And eventually, all the armed services adopted the same thing. 1988, Congress passed an act that requires federal agencies to use the metric system for all their activities. There are some exceptions when dealing with consumers, and I'll explain why that's a problem in a few minutes, a little later. But we are required, when we're doing, all of Congress is meant to, or all of these federal agencies are meant to have to use the metric system, which created a huge problem when we sent a Mars rover to Mars. One of the ones we first sent, they had measurements in inches, okay, and it had to be converted in centimeters. Well, somebody didn't do that, and it said, like, I'm going to make this up. Let's say that it had to do something when the lander was 4 inches off the ground, which is about that far. It needs to do this. Well, someone didn't convert it, and they just changed it to centimeters. Well, 4 centimeters is like this, 4 inches like this, 4 centimeters like that, much smaller. So the thing just crashed into the planet surface and destroyed itself. $200 million Mars lander, and it just destroyed itself because someone didn't know how to make the conversion. Because someone was working in inches, the other person was working in centimeters. As we continue through history, we are becoming more and more familiar. We buy bottles of soda in 2-liter bottles. We measure small things in grams. If you look at food, things are measured in grams. Prescriptions are milligrams and things like that. We do races in meters, 100-meter race in the Olympics and things. So we have a concept of it. We just don't use it. In the 70s, we actually tried to use it. Didn't go well, all right? So these are right now the only 3 countries in the world that use anything but the metric system. The United States, Libya in Africa, and Burma in Asia. Those are the 3 countries that do not use the metric system. And actually, Burma is switching over to the metric system. So soon it'll only be 2. But 3 countries, one of them is us. Everyone else in the world uses the metric system. So how do we standardize the measure? Something like this. The original second was based on a formula during dealing with the rotation of the sun. There was a way of measuring that. The problem is the Earth is slowing down, which could be an excuse why you could, when your parents say, hey, I need you to take out the trash, and you say a second, you could wait longer because the Earth is slowing down. A second is longer than it used to be if we based it on the rotation of the Earth. But now we're talking about it because we have that technology defined as the period of time in which a cesium atom emits exactly 9 billion whatever cycles of radiation waves, and that's measurable. We can measure that. That's what we measure a second on. It's something that's constant and we can measure. A meter used to be defined as 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the equator to the North Pole. In other words, it would go from the equator here to the North Pole here. We would measure this distance, all right, and divide it by 10 million. Problem with that? The Earth is not perfectly round. If you measure it there, you might come up with one thing. If you measure it over here, come up with another. And if you measure it over on this side, come up with another. The Earth is actually kind of more pear-shaped. I'm exaggerating this, but it's more pear-shaped. It's heavier bigger on the bottom than it is on the top. And so measuring at 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the equator to the North Pole is not consistent. So today we're talking about doing it based on light. Light travels exactly so many meters in a second in a vacuum, and we can measure that, and it's consistent. All right. The original kilogram was defined as a liter of pure water. That has been changed to this one thing. It's the one thing we don't use as a measurement of something. It's what we're using is actually a solid object, a piece of I don't have it here. I don't remember what it's made out of, but it's kept in a vault, locked in Paris, climate controlled, and you can see that. I think this is a mock-up of it, but it's in 2 bell jars, and we can measure it accurately to 1/100th of a million of part accuracy. So it's the one thing we don't have that is like a measurement of something. So what's a hectometer, millimeter, something like that. Well, I'm going to give you this later, but the ones that we're going to be dealing with here are like the millimeter. This is the base. This would be the meter, or maybe it's a liter, or maybe it's a gram. That would be the base. And what we're going to do is it's decimals. All right. So 1/10 of that is a deci, 1/100th of that is a centi, and 1/1000th of that is a millimeter. If we go up, 10 meters would be a decameter, 100 meters is a hectometer, and 1,000 meters is a kilometer. And the thing about this is it works both ways. All right, well, not both ways, but it works in length, it works in grams, it works in mass. All right, so if in our system we have 12 inches to a foot, 36 inches to a yard, 3 feet to a yard. If we go to weight or weight or mass, it's like 16 ounces is a pound, 2,000 pounds is a ton. If we go to volume, like 4 cups or 2 cups, I think is a pint. I'm going to get this wrong because I don't remember it. 2 pints is a quart, 4 quarts is a gallon, 55 gallons is a barrel. It's all over the place. You got to remember all these ways of doing it. This is based on 10. All you're doing is multiplying or dividing by 10, or just moving the decimal point. And we're going to talk about how to use this ladder later. Okay. So basically, each of these prefixes, you add it to a meter or a liter or an amp or a second or whatever you want to add it to, and it's like a centimeter would be 1/100th of a meter. So the centimeter is down here. All right, this is the centimeter. All right, and then you have a hectometer, which is 100. We can put them, like I said, in front of anything. So a hectometer is not the same thing as a hectogram, but it is 100 grams, 100 meters. A hectoliter is 100 liters. It's the same thing. We don't have to think of like pints and how many pints is of something, or how many yards is of something, or how many pounds is of something. All we have to do is multiply and divide by 10. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask in class. I'll be glad to answer them.